Sierra Blake had always been invisible in Timber Creek, Oregon, and that's exactly how she needed it to be. The small mountain town sat nestled between towering pine forests and the rushing waters of the Cascade River, where everyone knew everyone's morning coffee order except hers. For 8 years, she'd worked the early shift at the Blue Moon Diner, serving pancakes and small-town gossip with hands that moved with a precision nobody else seemed to notice. But every dawn, before the first customer pushed through the diner's creaky door, locals heard something strange from the wooded area behind Sierra's modest cabin. The sound of someone moving through darkness with military precision, practicing routines that had nothing to do with taking breakfast orders. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sierra was 34, but carried herself with the controlled awareness of someone much older and infinitely more dangerous. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her steel-gray eyes held a watchfulness that made even the town's toughest loggers think twice before getting too rowdy in her section. She wore the same uniform every day: black jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a Blue Moon Diner t-shirt that concealed the network of scars across her shoulders and arms, marks that told stories no waitress should know. The people of Timber Creek had their theories, of course. Betty Nakamura, the diner's 60-year-old owner, suspected Sierra was running from an abusive relationship. Frank Delacroix, the local sheriff and a regular at Booth 3, thought she might be in witness protection. The younger crowd whispered that she'd been in the military, pointing to the way she automatically scanned every entrance when someone new walked in, and how she never sat with her back to a door. But Sierra answered only what needed answering, maintaining an invisible barrier that said, "This far and no further." She was polite but not friendly, helpful but not personal, and skilled at deflecting questions with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. What they didn't know was what sat hidden in the reinforced basement beneath her cabin, concealed by false walls and electromagnetic shielding. Inside that space, which didn't appear on any building permits or satellite images, was an arsenal that would make a Navy SEAL team jealous: weapons, communications equipment, survival gear, and a go bag packed for immediate extraction. Sierra had spent years acquiring everything through channels no civilian should know about, maintaining readiness for a day she prayed would never come. Every piece of equipment was meticulously maintained, every battery charged, every weapon cleaned and ready. On the wall hung a tactical vest with one word stitched inside the collar: Mirage. It was a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 8 years, a ghost of a life that officially never existed. Every Sunday evening, when the diner closed and the town settled into its weekend quiet, Sierra would descend into that hidden basement and run through combat drills in the darkness. Her hands would move across weapons with the familiarity of old friends, and for just a moment, the careful mask she wore would slip. In those moments, she wasn't Sierra Blake, the quiet waitress who knew everyone's coffee preferences. She was someone else entirely. Someone who had been trained to kill without hesitation and disappear without a trace. The town's morning rhythm was as predictable as clockwork. At 5:30 a.m., Sierra would unlock the Blue Moon Diner's front door, flip on the neon sign, and start the coffee brewing. By 6 a.m., Frank Delacroix would lumber in for his usual black coffee, wheat toast, and 2 eggs over easy. At 6:15, the logging crews would arrive, loud and hungry, filling the air with talk of timber quotas and weekend plans. Sierra moved through these interactions like water, present but untouchable, efficient but emotionally distant. She remembered every order, anticipated every need, and deflected every attempt at personal conversation with practiced ease. The locals had learned to appreciate her competence without expecting intimacy. Betty Nakamura often watched Sierra work with a mixture of admiration and concern. The woman was the best employee she'd ever had. Never late, never sick, never distracted, but there was something almost mechanical about her perfection. Sometimes Betty caught glimpses of something deeper. The way Sierra's hand would instinctively move toward her hip when someone entered unexpectedly, or how she could calculate exact change for a complex order without looking at the register. "You've got good instincts," Betty had said once, watching Sierra diffuse a situation between 2 drunk loggers without raising her voice or calling for help.
Experience, Sierra had replied simply, already moving on to the next table.
Frank Delacroix had his own observations. In his 23 years as sheriff, he'd developed a sense for people who were more than they appeared. Sierra Blake registered on his radar like a low-frequency warning signal. Not dangerous, exactly, but definitely not what she seemed. Her situational awareness was too sharp, her physical conditioning too precise for someone whose most strenuous daily activity was carrying coffee pots. He'd run her identification through every database he could access. Sierra Blake existed on paper, social security number, birth certificate, employment history, but it all felt somehow manufactured, too clean and linear for a real person's messy life. When he'd asked her once about her family, she'd simply said, "It's complicated," and changed the subject so smoothly that he didn't realize what had happened until later. The truth was that Sierra Blake had been carefully constructed 8 years ago by people who specialized in creating new identities for those who needed to disappear completely. The woman who served coffee at the Blue Moon Diner was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, designed to be unremarkable enough to avoid attention, while providing enough documentation to satisfy casual scrutiny. But underneath that fabricated identity lay someone far more dangerous, a former Navy SEAL who had been part of the most classified operations in U.S. military history. Mirage had been her call sign, earned through an uncanny ability to appear and disappear at will, to become whoever the mission required her to be. On this particular Tuesday morning, as storm clouds gathered over the Cascade Mountains, Sierra felt a familiar tension in the air. Not just weather, but something else, the kind of atmospheric pressure that preceded significant change. She learned to trust these instincts during her years in special operations, where the difference between paranoia and survival was often measured in milliseconds. As she refilled Frank's coffee cup for the third time, Sierra's trained senses picked up something unusual, the sound of vehicles approaching from the mountain road, not local trucks or logging equipment. These had a different engine signature, heavier, more precise, with the distinctive rhythm of military convoy spacing. Through the diner's front window, she watched 3 black SUVs navigate the winding road into town, moving with the kind of coordination that made her blood run cold. No license plates visible from this distance, but the formations and timing screamed federal operation. Sierra's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the coffee pot as the vehicles slowed near the town center. After 8 years of perfect invisibility, something had found her. And in her experience, when the past came looking for you in a small mountain town, it usually meant someone was about to die. Behind the diner's counter, hidden beneath the cash register, was a panic button connected to systems that would wipe her basement clean and trigger extraction protocols she'd hoped never to use. Her fingers itched to press it, but years of training held her back. First, she needed to know what they wanted and how much they knew. The storm was moving closer now, thunder rumbling through the mountains like distant artillery. And for the first time in 8 years, Sierra Blake felt the past reaching through the shadows to reclaim her. As the black SUVs disappeared around a bend in the road, heading deeper into town, Sierra realized her carefully constructed life in Timber Creek was about to be tested in ways she'd spent nearly a decade trying to avoid. The question was whether Sierra Blake would survive what was coming, or if Mirage would have to wake up and take control once again. The rest of Tuesday morning passed with the deliberate normalcy that Sierra had perfected over 8 years of hiding in plain sight. She served the logging crews their usual hearty breakfasts, refilled coffee cups with clockwork precision, and exchanged pleasantries about the approaching storm. But beneath the surface, every nerve was alert, every sense attuned to potential threats. Betty Nakamura emerged from the kitchen at 9:30, wiping flour from her hands on a well-worn apron. "You're jumpy today," she observed, watching Sierra's eyes flick toward the window for the dozenth time in an hour. "Something wrong?" "Just keeping an eye on the weather," Sierra replied smoothly, setting down a plate of bacon and eggs in front of old Tom Morrison, who'd been coming to the Blue Moon every Tuesday for the past 15 years. "That storm looks like it's going to be a big one." Betty followed her gaze to the darkening sky. "Could be. Radio says we might get some flash flooding in the lower valleys." She paused, studying Sierra's face. "You sure that's all it is? You've been moving different today. More alert." Sierra's training kicked in automatically. Deflect, redirect, maintain cover. You know how it is when the pressure drops. Makes everyone a little edgy. She managed a convincing smile. Besides, Frank's been telling stories about his fishing trip again, enough to make anyone nervous. From booth 3, Sheriff Delacroix looked up from his newspaper with mock indignation. Hey now, that was a legitimate 12-pound bass, and you know it. Sure it was, Frank, she called back, grateful for the distraction. Just like last month's 20-pound salmon that somehow got smaller every time you told the story. The familiar banter felt surreal given the tension coiling in her chest, but it was necessary. These people were her cover, her camouflage in a world where being unremarkable meant staying alive. They'd unknowingly protected her for 8 years simply by accepting her as part of their daily routine. At 10:15, the morning rush began to thin out. The logging crews headed to the forests, Frank returned to his patrol rounds, and the diner settled into the quieter rhythm of mid-morning. Sierra used the lull to perform what appeared to be routine cleaning, but was actually a systematic security sweep. She wiped down tables while checking sightlines and exit routes. She restocked the coffee station while noting which vehicles remained in the parking lot and which belonged to people still inside. She swept the floor while listening for unusual engine sounds or radio chatter from the direction the black SUVs had traveled. Everything appeared normal, but Sierra's instincts screamed otherwise. In her experience, the most dangerous moments were often the quietest ones, the calm before operators moved into position. Sierra, honey, you want to take your break? Betty called from behind the counter. I can handle things for a few minutes. Thanks, but I'm good. Although part of me wanted to disappear into the woods behind the diner and activate every escape protocol she'd spent years preparing. Instead, she forced herself to maintain the routine. Breaking pattern now would only draw attention. At 10:15, her first real test arrived in the form of 2 strangers who entered the diner with the kind of casual alertness that screamed law enforcement. They were good, dressed like traveling salesmen, moving with the relaxed confidence of people who belonged, but Sierra's trained eye caught the telltale signs. The slight bulge of concealed weapons, the way they automatically chose seats with clear views of all entrances, the microsecond pause as they scanned the room upon entry. Morning, gentlemen, Sierra said, approaching their table with coffee pot in hand. What can I get you? Coffee would be great, the taller one said, his accent carrying hints of Virginia. We're passing through, wondering if you might recommend some local sites. Sierra poured their coffee with steady hands while her mind raced. The question was innocuous enough, but the timing was suspicious. Depends what you're interested in. We've got some nice hiking trails up in the mountains, though with this storm coming in, you might want to stick closer to town. Actually, the shorter man said, we heard there might be some interesting history around here. Stories about people who've made this place home after traveling extensively. The phrase was carefully chosen, designed to probe without being specific. Sierra recognized the technique. Intelligence gathering disguised as casual conversation. They were fishing, testing to see if she'd react to coded language. Well, Timber Creek's got its share of folks who came here looking for a quieter life. Mountains have a way of attracting people who prefer privacy. More coffee?
She refilled their cups while memorizing every detail. The way the tall one kept his right hand free and positioned near his waist, the small earpiece barely visible in the shorter man's left ear, the fact that neither had actually touched their coffee despite claiming to want it. That's interesting, the tall one pressed gently. We're particularly interested in stories about people with, specialized backgrounds. Military, perhaps. Sierra's blood chilled, but her expression never wavered. You might want to talk to Frank Delacroix, our sheriff. He was Army back in the day. Loves sharing war stories with anyone who will listen. Frank Delacroix, the shorter man repeated, as if filing the name away. Anyone else? Maybe someone who served more recently? The directness of the question confirmed Sierra's suspicions. These weren't random travelers.
They were advance scouts, gathering intelligence before a larger operation moved in. The black SUVs had been reconnaissance. These men were the follow-up. "Well, we appreciate the coffee and the conversation," the tall one said, leaving a $20 bill on the table, far too much for 2 cups of coffee, and clearly intended to ensure they'd be remembered positively. As they left, Sierra watched through the window as they walked to a sedan parked across the street. The vehicle had been positioned for optimal surveillance of the diner's front entrance. They sat inside for several minutes, making phone calls and taking notes, before driving slowly out of town on the same mountain road the SUVs had used. Betty appeared at Sierra's shoulder. "Strange fellas. Didn't drink their coffee." "Probably just nervous about the storm," Sierra said. But her mind was already racing through contingency plans. The scouts would report back, a decision would be made, and soon, possibly within hours, her carefully constructed world would come crashing down. She spent the next hour serving lunch to locals while internally cataloging everything she'd need to survive what was coming. Her go bag was ready, her escape routes memorized, and her weapons cache fully stocked. But leaving meant abandoning 8 years of painstaking identity construction and putting everyone in Timber Creek at potential risk. More importantly, running meant never knowing why they'd found her or what they wanted. In Sierra's experience, unknown threats had a way of becoming persistent problems. Sometimes the only solution was to face them head-on. As the afternoon wore on and storm clouds continued gathering over the mountains, Sierra Blake made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to run. Not yet. Instead, she was going to wait and see exactly what kind of hell was heading her way. Because after 8 years of being invisible, Mirage was curious to know who'd been clever enough to find her.
Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that preceded violent storms. Sierra unlocked the Blue Moon Diner at 5:30 a.m., as usual, but every movement was calculated, every gesture deliberate. She'd spent the night in her basement, running through contingency scenarios and checking equipment she hadn't touched in years. The familiar weight of a concealed Glock 19 now rested against her ribs, hidden beneath her uniform shirt. The morning routine played out with deceptive normalcy. Frank Delacroix arrived at 6 sharp, settling into booth 3 with his usual grunt of acknowledgement. The logging crews filtered in throughout the early hour, their conversations focused on weather concerns and work schedules. Betty emerged from the kitchen with fresh pies, chattering about her granddaughter's upcoming graduation. But Sierra's attention was divided between serving coffee and monitoring the mountain road through the diner's front windows. She'd positioned herself to maintain clear sightlines while appearing to focus on her work. Every vehicle that passed received her scrutiny. Every unfamiliar face got cataloged and assessed. At 7:45 a.m., her patience was rewarded. 3 black SUVs crested the hill leading into town, moving with the same precise formation as the previous day. But this time, they didn't drive past. They turned into Timber Creek's small downtown area, navigating the narrow streets with purpose that made Sierra's pulse quicken. "Expecting company?" Frank asked, following her gaze to the approaching vehicles. "Not that I know of," Sierra replied, refilling his coffee cup with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Probably just more tourists getting an early start before the storm hits." But Frank's law enforcement instincts were already engaged. "Tourists don't usually travel in convoy formation," he observed quietly. "And those vehicles have government plates." Sierra's blood went cold. If Frank could read the plates from this distance, the operation had moved beyond covert reconnaissance into open approach. Whatever they wanted, they decided stealth was no longer necessary. The lead SUV pulled into the Blue Moon's parking lot, followed by the other 2 vehicles positioning themselves to block potential exit routes. Sierra counted at least 8 figures, moving with military precision as they disembarked, too many for a simple arrest, not enough for an assault. This was a controlled approach designed to minimize resistance while maintaining overwhelming tactical advantage.
The diner's bell chimed as the first man entered, and Sierra felt 8 years of careful camouflage evaporate in an instant. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of alert posture that screamed special operations. His civilian clothes were expensive but practical, chosen to blend in while allowing for immediate action. Most tellingly, his eyes swept the room with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained to identify and neutralize threats. Behind him came 2 more men with similar bearing, followed by a 4th figure that made Sierra's breath catch in her throat. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Garrett moved with the fluid confidence she remembered from another life, his presence filling the small diner like a gravitational force. His dark hair was shorter now, his face marked by years of command responsibility, but she'd have recognized him anywhere. "Morning," Garrett said to the room in general, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made people instinctively pay attention. "Beautiful little place you have here." The logging crews sensed the shift in atmosphere immediately. Conversations died, coffee cups paused halfway to lips, and the easy camaraderie of small-town morning routine evaporated under the weight of focused attention. Even Betty emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the sudden tension. Frank's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, cop instincts recognizing a situation rapidly moving beyond normal parameters. "Help you gentlemen with something?" "Just looking for some coffee and conversation," Garrett replied smoothly, his eyes finding Sierra across the room. "Heard this place serves the best breakfast in the county." Sierra felt the moment of recognition hit him like an electric shock. His expression didn't change, years of training ensured that, but she caught the slight dilation of his pupils, the micro pause in his breathing. Ryan Garrett had found what he'd come looking for. "Well, you heard right," Betty said, bustling forward with the kind of aggressive hospitality that masked her own nervousness. "Sierra, get these gentlemen seated and bring them some coffee." The use of her assumed name in Garrett's presence felt like a gunshot in the confined space. Sierra watched him process the information, connecting the dots between the woman he had once known and the small-town waitress standing before him. "Sierra," he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the name. "That's a beautiful name. Very distinctive."
She approached their table with the coffee pot, every step measured and controlled. Up close, she could see the barely concealed shock in Garrett's eyes, the way his team positioned themselves to cut off her escape routes without appearing threatening to the civilians. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice carrying the same cheerful professionalism she'd perfected over 8 years of hiding. Garrett studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Actually, we're not here for breakfast. We're here because we need to talk to someone about a matter of national security." The words hit the diner like a bomb blast. Frank's chair scraped as he stood, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. The logging crews began shifting nervously, uncertain whether they should stay or go. Betty's face went pale as she realized her quiet employee had somehow become the center of a federal operation. "National security?" Frank demanded, his sheriff's authority asserting itself. "In my jurisdiction? I'm going to need to see some identification and know what this is about." Garrett reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness, producing a leather folder that he handed to Frank. "Lieutenant Commander Ryan Garrett, Naval Special Warfare Command. We're here on urgent military business." Frank examined the credentials with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen his share of federal agents. "This doesn't give you jurisdiction over civilian matters in my county," he said firmly. "Whatever you think you're here for, it goes through me." "Sheriff," Garrett said respectfully, "I appreciate your position, but this is a matter of immediate national importance. We're not here to arrest anyone or cause trouble. We just need to speak with someone who might have information vital to ongoing operations." Sierra felt the walls closing in as every eye in the diner focused on her. The careful identity she'd constructed was crumbling under the weight of attention she'd spent years avoiding. But she also sensed something else in Garrett's approach, desperation masked by professionalism, urgency that went beyond routine investigation. "What kind of information?" she asked quietly, setting down the coffee pot with hands that showed no tremor. Garrett's eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, 8 years collapsed into nothing.
the kind that only someone with very specific training and experience would possess. Someone who might have served in highly classified operations. Someone who might have been known by a different name in a different life. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Sierra felt the weight of decision pressing down on her shoulders. Maintain the lie and hope they'd leave, or acknowledge the truth and face whatever consequences followed. Frank stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding his confusion. Now, hold on just a minute. Sierra's been part of this community for 8 years? She's a waitress, not some kind of military operative. 8 years, Garrett repeated meaningfully. That's a very specific time frame, Sheriff. Coincidentally, it's exactly how long ago certain classified operations were concluded and certain personnel were reassigned. Sierra realized that running was no longer an option. These men had done their homework, connected too many dots, gathered too much evidence. The only question now was what they wanted and whether she could give it to them without destroying everything she'd built. "I think," she said carefully, "you gentlemen might want to be more specific about what you're looking for." Garrett smiled, and Sierra caught a glimpse of the man she'd once trusted with her life. "What we're looking for, ma'am, is someone who used to be known by the call sign Mirage. Someone who specialized in impossible extractions and deep cover operations. Someone who died, officially, 8 years ago, but might still be alive and serving coffee in a small Oregon town." The silence that followed was deafening. Sierra felt the careful facade of Sierra Blake cracking like ice under pressure, revealing glimpses of the operator she'd once been. The question was whether Mirage was ready to answer the call one more time. The diner remained frozen in tableau for what felt like an eternity. Sierra could hear her heartbeat in her ears, the tick of the wall clock behind the counter, the distant rumble of thunder from the approaching storm. Every person in the blue moon seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for her response to Garrett's impossible accusation. Frank broke the silence first, his voice tight with protective anger. "That's enough. I don't know what kind of game you people are playing, but Sierra Blake is a respected member of this community. She's not some kind of—" "It's okay, Frank." Sierra's voice cut through his protest with quiet authority that made everyone look at her differently. The hesitation was gone, replaced by something harder, more certain. "They're not wrong." The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened, her movements became more precise, and her eyes took on the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. The nervous waitress dissolved like morning mist, revealing something far more dangerous underneath. Betty's face went pale. "Sierra, what are they talking about?" Sierra looked at the woman who'd been her employer and unwitting protector for 8 years, feeling the weight of necessary betrayal. "My name isn't Sierra Blake. That identity was created to keep me safe after I left military service." "Left," Garrett interjected gently, "or were extracted after Operation Black Tide went sideways." The code name hit like a physical blow, dragging memories Sierra had spent years suppressing back to the surface. Mogadishu, the embassy extraction that became a massacre. 17 operatives went in, only 3 came out alive. She'd been declared KIA along with the rest of her team, their sacrifice buried under layers of classification to protect ongoing operations. "That operation is classified above your clearance level, Commander," she said, falling back into military formality despite herself. "Was classified," Garrett corrected. "Recent developments have changed the security protocols around Black Tide assets, which is why we're here." Frank stepped between them, his hand out openly resting on his service weapon. "I'm going to need everyone to slow down and explain what's happening in my town. Sierra, are you telling me you're some kind of federal agent?" "Former," Sierra said quietly. "Very former." She moved to the coffee station, using the familiar routine to buy time, while her mind raced through implications. Garrett's presence meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Naval Special Warfare Command didn't send teams to retrieve ghosts unless the situation was desperate. "What's the threat assessment?" she asked, slipping into operational language as naturally as breathing. Critical, Garrett replied immediately. We have reason to believe Admiral Nathan Holloway has been selling classified operational intelligence to hostile foreign entities, intelligence that includes detailed files on black-tide personnel and their current identities. The implications hit Sierra like ice water. If Holloway had access to their extraction protocols, their new identities, their current locations, then nowhere was safe. Not for her, and not for the other survivors of operations that officially never existed. How many others? She asked. We're not sure, but 3 former operatives with black-tide connections have died in the past 6 months. All apparent accidents, all bearing Holloway's signature. Betty sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by revelations that transformed her quiet employee into something from a spy thriller. Sierra, who are you really? Sierra met her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of deception. My real name is Chief Petty Officer Sierra Martinez. I was part of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, assigned to classified operations that involved deep cover infiltration and high-value target extraction. Navy SEAL, Frank said, recognition dawning in his voice. You're a goddamn Navy SEAL. Was, Sierra corrected. Officially, I died in Somalia 8 years ago during a classified mission. Sierra Blake was created as my civilian identity for protective resettlement. One of Garrett's team members approached their table, speaking in low, urgent tones. Garrett's expression darkened as he listened, then nodded grimly. We have a problem. Satellite imagery shows hostile movement in the area. At least 2 teams, possibly more, approaching from different vectors. Someone knows we're here. Sierra's training kicked into high gear. Holloway's people? Most likely. Our extraction of you was supposed to be covert, but it appears we've been compromised. Garrett stood, his team automatically shifting into defensive positions. We need to move. Now. Move where? Frank demanded, his sheriff's instincts fighting against a situation spiraling beyond his control. Somewhere more defensible than a glass-fronted diner in the middle of town, Garrett replied tersely. He turned to Sierra. Chief, we need your local knowledge. Best defensive position within a 5-mile radius.
The use of her former rank and the return to operational necessity felt like putting on clothes she'd forgotten she owned. Sierra's mind automatically began cataloging terrain features, defensive advantages, and escape routes she'd memorized years ago as part of her security protocols. The old fire lookout tower on Cascade Ridge, she said without hesitation. Single access road, clear fields of fire, hardened communications equipment. If you're planning to make a stand, that's your best option. Can you get us there without using main roads? Sierra almost smiled at the question. She'd spent 8 years exploring every game trail, logging road, and deer path in a 30-mile radius. I could get us there blindfolded. The tactical discussion was interrupted by the sound of distant helicopters, multiple aircraft approaching from the south. Through the diner's windows, Sierra could see black dots against the storm clouds, moving with military precision toward Timber Creek. Contact, one of Garrett's men reported tersely. 4 birds inbound, estimated time to arrival, 6 minutes. Betty grabbed Sierra's arm, her voice shaking. What's happening? Are we in danger? Sierra looked at the woman who'd unknowingly harbored a ghost for 8 years, feeling the familiar weight of protecting civilians who'd been drawn into operational parameters through no fault of their own. Yes, she said honestly, you need to get everyone out of here, now. Frank stepped forward, his duty as sheriff overriding his confusion. I'm not leaving my town. Frank, those helicopters aren't coming for a friendly chat. They're coming to eliminate witnesses and clean up loose ends. That includes anyone who might have information about my real identity. The reality of the situation finally penetrated the diner's shocked atmosphere. The logging crews began moving toward the exits, their earlier curiosity replaced by survival instincts. Betty started toward the kitchen, probably to grab her purse and car keys. Garrett checked his watch. 5 minutes. Chief, we need to move. Sierra looked around the Blue Moon Diner one last time. At the coffee-stained counter where she had served thousands of cups, at the booth where Frank had eaten breakfast every morning for 8 years, and at the walls decorated with local high school graduation photos and community achievement awards.
This place had been her sanctuary, her proof that normal life was possible even after everything she had done and seen. Now, it was about to become a battleground. "I need 2 minutes," she told Garrett. "There's equipment I need for my cabin." "Negative. We don't have time for personal effects." Sierra's smile was sharp as a blade. "Commander, I'm not talking about souvenirs. I'm talking about weapons, communications gear, and tactical equipment that's going to keep us alive through whatever Holloway has planned." Garrett studied her face, seeing the transformation from a waitress to operator finally complete. 2 minutes, then we move, with or without you. As they prepared to abandon her carefully constructed life, Sierra felt the familiar calm that preceded combat operations. Sierra Blake had been a beautiful dream, but dreams ended when nightmares came calling. Mirage was going back to work.
Sierra's cabin sat 200 yards behind the Blue Moon Diner, connected by a worn path that wound through stands of Douglas fir and Oregon pine. What had taken her 8 minutes to walk leisurely every morning now became a 2-minute sprint through terrain she knew better than her own reflection. Garrett and his team followed her with the fluid precision of operators who'd trained together for years, their movements coordinated despite the urgency. Behind them, the sound of approaching helicopters grew steadily louder, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of military rotors cutting through the mountain air like mechanical thunder. 30 seconds, Garrett called as they reached her front porch. Sierra didn't waste time with keys. A sharp kick to a specific point on the doorframe triggered the hidden release mechanism, and the door swung open to reveal what appeared to be a modest cabin interior, but appearances, as always with Sierra Blake, were carefully designed to deceive. She moved directly to the stone fireplace, pressing a concealed switch that caused the entire hearth to rotate on hidden hinges. Behind it lay a staircase descending into the reinforced basement that had been her real sanctuary for 8 years. "Jesus Christ," one of Garrett's men whispered as they followed her down into what was essentially a military-grade armory disguised as a root cellar. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The basement was a masterwork of preparation and paranoia. Weapons lined reinforced walls in precise military order: assault rifles, sniper systems, explosives, and enough ammunition to sustain a small war. Communications equipment hummed quietly in one corner, maintaining encrypted links to networks that officially didn't exist. Maps covered every surface, marked with escape routes, cache locations, and defensive positions within a 50-mile radius. But Sierra moved past all of it with purpose, heading directly to a wall-mounted case containing what appeared to be a standard tactical vest. As she lifted it down, Garrett could see the name stitched inside the collar: Mirage. "My old kit," she explained, strapping on the vest with movements made automatic by years of training, modified for deep cover operations. She moved through the armory with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment countless times, selecting weapons and equipment with tactical precision: a suppressed HK-416 assault rifle, ceramic body armor, night vision goggles, and enough high explosives to level a city block. "Chief," Garrett said urgently, "we need to move." Almost finished. Sierra was loading magazines with the kind of mechanical precision that came from muscle memory. "Commander, I need to know exactly what we're walking into. What's Holloway's endgame?" "Intelligence suggests he's been selling operational details to a consortium of hostile foreign entities. Names, locations, capabilities of assets from Black Tide, and at least 6 other classified operations." "That's espionage, not elimination protocol," Sierra observed, shouldering her rifle. "Why the kill teams?" "Because the sale is happening tomorrow night. High-value intelligence auction in international waters. If he can eliminate the assets before the sale, he can guarantee the buyers that their investment won't come back to haunt them." The implications were staggering. Dozens of operators who'd sacrificed everything for their country, now marked for death by the very system they had served. Sierra felt the familiar cold fury that had made her legendary in the special operations community. "How many assets are we talking about?" 43 confirmed identities compromised, maybe more. Sierra's jaw tightened. 43 ghosts who'd earned their anonymity through blood and sacrifice, now hunted by the very system they had served. "And you came for me because—" Garrett's voice carried an urgency that went beyond professional necessity. "The sale is happening on a private yacht in international waters, heavily defended,
Multiple security layers. Extraction would be nearly impossible. Nearly? You've done it before. The Jakarta extraction, 2018. Similar target, similar defenses. Sierra remembered. A floating fortress disguised as a luxury yacht protected by military-grade security and international law. She got in, eliminated 3 high-value targets, and extracted with intelligence that prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. Officially, the mission never happened. That was different, she said, leading them back up the stairs. This time you have us, Garrett said simply.
Through the cabin windows, Sierra could see the helicopters had reached the edge of town. 4 aircraft in attack formation, moving with the kind of precision that suggested military pilots and combat-ready equipment. Holloway wasn't taking any chances. "Commander, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "Go ahead." "Why should I trust you?" Sierra's question carried the weight of 8 years' worth of paranoia and survival instincts. How do I know this isn't another Holloway operation designed to draw me out? Garrett met her eyes steadily. Because of this. He pulled a photograph from his jacket, a picture Sierra recognized immediately. 5 operators standing in front of a helicopter in the Somalia desert, faces blackened with sand and exhaustion. In the center stood a younger Sierra, barely visible beneath tactical gear and camouflage paint. Next to her was a man she'd thought dead for 8 years. "Alex Martinez, your brother. He survived black tide." Sierra's world tilted on its axis. Alex had been part of the embassy extraction team, listed among the KIA when the mission went catastrophically wrong. She'd mourned him for 8 years, carried the guilt of being unable to save him, built her new life on the foundation of his sacrifice. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He was captured, held in a black site prison for 3 years before we could extract him, spent another 2 years in military medical facilities recovering from what they did to him." Garrett's voice was gentle but relentless. "He's alive, Sierra, but he's one of the 43 assets Holloway plans to eliminate." The photograph trembled in Sierra's hands as 8 years of grief and guilt transformed into something far more dangerous. Hope mixed with homicidal rage. "Where is he?" "Safe house in Virginia, but not for long. Holloway's teams hit 3 locations yesterday. Alex's position is compromised. We estimate 12 hours before they find him." Sierra felt the last vestiges of her civilian identity burning away like paper in a furnace. Alex was alive. Alex was in danger, and Admiral Nathan Holloway was responsible for both facts. "What do you need me to do?" "Help us get to that yacht. Stop the intelligence sale. Eliminate Holloway before he can finish cleaning house." The helicopters were directly overhead now, their rotor wash shaking the cabin's windows. Through the trees, Sierra could see dark figures rappelling toward the diner, moving with military precision toward the place she'd called home for 8 years. "I'm in," she said simply. "But we do this my way, with my rules, and nobody gets left behind." Garrett nodded grimly. "Understood. But first, we need to get out of here alive." Sierra checked her weapon one final time, feeling the familiar weight of impending combat. Outside, hostile forces were closing in on her sanctuary. Ahead lay a mission that would either save dozens of lives or get them all killed. But for the first time in 8 years, Chief Petty Officer Sierra Martinez felt like she was exactly where she belonged, between her brother and the people who wanted him dead. "Follow me," she said, leading them toward a concealed exit that would take them into the forest. "And try to keep up. We've got a war to win."
The concealed exit from Sierra's basement opened into a natural depression 20 yards from the cabin, hidden beneath a camouflaged hatch that appeared to be nothing more than forest floor. She'd spent 2 years perfecting the escape route, anticipating exactly this kind of scenario, hostile forces closing in while she needed to disappear without a trace. "Impressive," Garrett murmured as they emerged into the Oregon wilderness, already moving at a tactical pace through terrain that would challenge most civilians.
Paranoia keeps you alive, Sierra replied, automatically falling into point position as they navigated through dense undergrowth. Behind them, the sound of breaching turges echoed across the mountains as Holloway's team hit her cabin. They'd find the basement armory eventually, but the forensic evidence would suggest she'd been gone for hours. The forest around Timber Creek was Sierra's domain, mapped and memorized through 8 years of solitary hikes and training exercises. She led Garrett's team along dame trails invisible to untrained eyes, moving with the silent efficiency that had earned her legendary status in the special operations community. Contact, whispered Torres, Garrett's communications specialist, pressing his earpiece. Multiple vehicles surrounding the town. They're setting up a perimeter. Sierra wasn't surprised. Holloway's people were professional, probably former military themselves. They'd approach the problem systematically, contain the area, eliminate witnesses, sanitize the evidence. Standard protocol for black operations that couldn't be allowed to leave loose ends. How many? She asked, pausing behind a massive Douglas fir to assess their tactical situation. Satellite shows at least 30 personnel, possibly more. 4 helicopters, 8 ground vehicles, and what appears to be a mobile command center. Garrett studied Sierra's face in the filtered forest light. They brought an army. Good, Sierra said grimly. Means they're taking me seriously. She pulled out a ruggedized tablet, calling up topographical maps she'd stored for exactly this contingency. The display showed their current position relative to multiple escape routes, supply caches, and defensive positions she had established throughout the mountains. We need transportation and a secure communications link to coordinate with your people, she marked locations on the digital map. There's a ranger station 12 miles north with vehicle access and hardened communications equipment. 12 miles through hostile territory, observed Reeves, Garrett's second-in-command. Not hostile, Sierra corrected. Home field advantage. As if to emphasize her point, she led them off the trail entirely, navigating through terrain that seemed impassable to anyone lacking her intimate knowledge of the landscape. They moved through narrow ravines, across fallen logs that bridged rushing streams, and along ridge lines that provided concealment while offering clear views of the valleys below. 20 minutes into their movement, Sierra held up a closed fist, the universal military signal for immediate halt. Through the trees ahead, she could see movement that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the forest. Patrol, she whispered, pointing toward 2 figures in tactical gear moving along a logging road 50 yards from their position. They're good, but they're not thinking like locals. Garrett's team automatically spread into defensive positions, weapons ready but not yet aimed. These were operators who understood the difference between preparation and escalation. Sierra studied the patrol through her rifle scope, noting equipment, movement patterns, and communication protocols. Former military, probably private contractors, expensive gear, professional discipline, but they're following standard search patterns. Can we go around? Garrett asked. We could, Sierra said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. But they're between us and innocent civilians who are probably hiding in their homes right now, wondering why their quiet town has turned into a war zone. The implication was clear. Sierra wasn't just thinking tactically, she was thinking protectively. These mountains weren't just terrain to her. They were home to people who'd unknowingly sheltered her for 8 years. Chief, we can't engage every patrol between here and the objective, Garrett said quietly. We need to maintain operational security. Sierra's smile was sharp as winter steel. Commander, operational security is exactly what I'm thinking about. If we eliminate this patrol cleanly, their command structure will assume they've moved out of radio range, standard procedure in mountainous terrain. She was already moving before Garrett could object, flowing through the underbrush with the fluid silence that had made her nickname appropriate. Mirage didn't just disappear. She appeared exactly where enemies least expected her.
The 2-man patrol never knew what hit them. Sierra emerged from their blind spot like a shadow given substance, using non-lethal takedown techniques that left them unconscious but alive. In 30 seconds, 2 professional operators were zip-tied and hidden in brush so thick they wouldn't be found until the snow melted. Jesus, breathed Williams, the youngest member of Garrett's team. I've never seen anyone move like that. Now you know why they called her Mirage, Garrett said with something approaching reverence. The stories weren't exaggerated.
Sierra was already stripping useful equipment from the unconscious men: radio frequencies, tactical maps, operational codes that would give them insight into Holloway's deployment. Everything she found confirmed her assessment. This was a major operation with significant resources and professional personnel. "They're using standard encirclement tactics," she reported, studying the captured intelligence. "But they're thinking conventionally, assuming I'll try to break contact and run." "You're not running?" Torres asked. Sierra's expression was the kind that had once terrified enemies across 3 continents. "I spent 8 years running from my past. Today, my past comes running to me." She keyed the captured radio to monitor Holloway's command frequency, listening to status reports that revealed the full scope of their situation. Teams were sweeping through Timber Creek systematically, checking every building, questioning every resident, looking for any trace of Sierra Blake or the federal agents who'd come to find her. "They've got Betty," she said quietly, hearing a report about the diner owner being detained for questioning. "Who's Betty?" Reeves asked. "The woman who gave me a job when I needed to disappear. The woman who invited me to Christmas dinner every year because she thought I was alone." Sierra's voice carried a cold fury that made Garrett's team exchange worried glances. "The woman who's in danger because she helped me without knowing what she was protecting." Garrett recognized the signs: personal investment overriding tactical considerations. It was dangerous in an operator, but it was also what separated true warriors from mere technicians. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Sierra stood, shouldering her rifle with movements that spoke of absolute certainty. "I want to remind Admiral Holloway why they used to send me into situations where everyone else had already failed." She began moving through the forest again, but this time her direction wasn't toward the ranger station and escape. She was moving back toward Timber Creek, toward the enemy force that outgunned and outnumbered them 10-1. "Chief, that's not tactically sound," Garrett warned. "Commander," Sierra replied without slowing her pace, "tactical soundness is for people who fight fair. I fight to win." Behind them, radio chatter on the captured frequency indicated that the unconscious patrol had been discovered. Voices were becoming more urgent, search patterns more aggressive. Holloway's people knew they were no longer hunting a lone fugitive. They were hunting a ghost who decided to haunt them back. As storm clouds continued gathering over the Cascade Mountains, Sierra Martinez led a team of Navy SEALs toward a confrontation that would either save her brother and dozens of other operators or get them all killed in the mountains of Oregon. But for the first time in 8 years, she felt truly alive.
The ranger station sat abandoned in a clearing 2 miles north of Timber Creek, its communication array still functional despite the building's seasonal closure. Sierra had used it before during her years of maintaining operational readiness, knowing that federal emergency frequencies would provide secure channels when needed. But as they approached through the tree line, Sierra's tactical instincts screamed warnings. The building was too quiet, the surrounding area too empty of the wildlife that should be present at this altitude. "It's a trap," she said simply, raising her fist to halt the team. Garrett studied the scene through his scope. "How can you tell?" "Birds," Sierra replied, pointing toward the forest canopy. "They should be everywhere at this time of day, but the area around the station is completely silent. Something spooked them." She was already moving to a flanking position when the first shots rang out. Suppressed rifle fire coming from concealed positions around the ranger station. Muzzle flashes bloomed in the shadows like deadly flowers, and rounds whined through the air where they'd been standing moments before. "Contact front and right," Torres shouted, dropping behind a fallen log as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Sierra was already in motion, flowing through the terrain with predatory grace. She'd identified 3 firing positions in the first volley and was moving to neutralize them before Holloway's people could adjust their fields of fire. The first sniper never saw her coming. Sierra emerged from his blind spot like a vengeful spirit, using her knife to eliminate the threat silently while his spotter was focused on Garrett's position. 2 down in 15 seconds. "Left flank clear," she reported through her throat microphone, already moving to the next position. But something was wrong. The ambush was too well coordinated, the positions too perfectly sighted for this to be a hasty operation. Holloway's people had been waiting for them specifically, knowing they'd head for the communication station.
"Commander, we need to extract," she called to Garrett. "This entire operation is compromised." "Negative," Garrett replied, laying down covering fire as his team maneuvered against the remaining positions. "We need that communication link." Sierra realized with growing certainty that they'd been outplayed from the beginning. Holloway hadn't just found her. He'd predicted her responses, anticipated her tactical choices, prepared for exactly the kind of operation Garrett was running. The captured radio crackled with new intelligence that confirmed her worst fears. "Overwatch, this is Ground Team Alpha. Package is confirmed in the operational area. Repeat, Mirage is active and engaged." "Copy, Ground Team Alpha. Phase 2 is authorized. Execute containment protocol." Sierra's blood went cold. Phase 2 meant escalation, probably involving the civilians in Timber Creek as leverage or casualties. Holloway was playing a deeper game than simple asset elimination. "Taurus, can you tap into their command frequency?" she asked, dropping another sniper with precision that bordered on supernatural. "Working on it," Taurus replied, his communication equipment scattered around his position as he worked under fire. "Give me 30 seconds. Sierra didn't have 30 seconds. Through her scope, she could see movement in the valley below, vehicles converging on Timber Creek from multiple directions. Too many vehicles with too much equipment for a simple search and destroy mission. "Commander, they're not just here to kill me," she realized. "This is a harvesting operation." "What do you mean?" "Look at the deployment pattern. They're setting up for intelligence collection, not elimination. Holloway wants to interrogate everyone who's had contact with me over the past 8 years. The implications were staggering. Betty, Frank, the logging crews, every regular customer at the Blue Moon Diner, all of them now potential sources of intelligence about Sierra's methods, habits, and psychological profile. Information that could be used to hunt down other hidden operators." Torres succeeded in breaking into Holloway's command net just as Sierra's worst fears were confirmed. "All teams, this is command. Begin Phase 2 collection protocols. Detain all civilians for enhanced interrogation. Priority targets include the diner owner, local law enforcement, and any individuals with extended contact with the asset." Enhanced interrogation was military euphemism for torture. Holloway was preparing to brutalize innocent people to extract every piece of information about Sierra's 8 years in hiding. "That's it," Sierra said, her voice carrying a lethal calm that made Garrett's team exchange worried glances. She began moving with renewed purpose, not towards escape, but towards the enemy positions with aggressive intent. Her rifle barked steadily as she advanced through terrain that should have been impossible to traverse under fire. "Chief, what are you doing?"
"Changing the rules of engagement," Sierra replied, dropping 2 more hostiles with shots that defied the laws of physics and probability. "They want to play games with civilian lives? Let's see how they handle direct action." She keyed her captured radio to Holloway's command frequency, broadcasting on all channels, with authority that cut through military protocol like a blade. "Admiral Nathan Holloway, this is Chief Petty Officer Sierra Martinez. Call sign Mirage. You have 30 seconds to release all civilian detainees and withdraw your forces from Timber Creek." The response was immediate and filled with smug satisfaction. "Chief Martinez, this is Admiral Holloway. I'm afraid you're not in a position to make demands. We have 17 civilians in custody, and their continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." "Admiral, you've made 2 critical errors," Sierra replied, advancing through the forest like an avenging angel. "First, you assumed I'd prioritize civilian safety over operational necessity. Second, you brought conventional forces to fight an unconventional enemy. And what makes you think you can challenge a full tactical deployment with a 4-man team?" Sierra's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Because you've been chasing ghosts, Admiral. You've been tracking Sierra Blake, a waitress who serves coffee and minds her own business. But you just threatened the people she cares about." She paused at the edge of the ranger station clearing, where the last of Holloway's ambush team was realizing their positions had been compromised. "You're not dealing with Sierra Blake anymore. You're dealing with Mirage. And Mirage doesn't negotiate with terrorists, even ones wearing American uniforms." The radio fell silent as Sierra emerged from the tree line like something from a nightmare, moving with fluid precision that defied rational explanation. The remaining snipers opened fire, but she was already somewhere else, flowing through their defensive positions like smoke through a screen door. In 45 seconds, the ranger station was secure, and 5 more of Holloway's professionals were either dead or unconscious. Sierra's team had taken 0 casualties. "How the hell did you do that?" Williams asked in amazement. "Training,"
Sierra replied simply, already working on the communication equipment. And 8 years of very specific preparation. As she established contact with external forces, Sierra realized the true scope of Holloway's operation. This wasn't just about eliminating black tide survivors, it was about harvesting their techniques, their methods, their psychological profiles for sale to the highest bidder. Commander, we're not just stopping an intelligence sale, we're stopping the systematic exploitation of American special operations capabilities. Through the communication array, she began reaching out to networks that officially didn't exist, calling in favors from people who owed their lives to operations that never happened. The real war was just beginning, and Sierra Martinez had decided to take it directly to Admiral Nathan Holloway's doorstep.
The secure communication link crackled to life with voices from Sierra's past, operators who'd served in the shadows, intelligence officers who owed their careers to missions that officially never existed, and Pentagon officials who understood that some wars were fought in complete darkness. "Mirage, this is Blackwater Base," came a voice Sierra recognized as Colonel Patricia Santos, her former commanding officer. "We've been monitoring Holloway's communications. The yacht rendezvous is confirmed for tomorrow night, 30 miles off the California coast." "Colonel," Sierra replied, feeling the weight of old loyalties and new urgencies. "What's our support structure?" "Limited. Holloway has allies in multiple agencies, and we can't trust normal channels. But there are people who remember what you did for this country, and they're willing to return the favor." Through the ranger station's communication array, Sierra began coordinating a response that would have impressed Pentagon war planners. Within 20 minutes, she'd established contact with submarine assets, arranged for air support from pilots who flew missions that didn't appear on any official logs, and activated supply caches that had been positioned for exactly this kind of off-the-books operation. "Impressive network," Garrett observed, monitoring the tactical coordination with professional admiration. 8 years of careful preparation," Sierra replied. "I knew eventually someone would come looking, so I made sure I'd have friends when they did." But even as she coordinated external support, Sierra's primary focus remained on the immediate tactical situation. Holloway's forces still controlled Timbercreek, still held 17 innocent civilians whose only crime was knowing a waitress who served excellent coffee. "Torres, what's the latest intelligence on civilian locations?" she asked. "They're being held in the community center," Torres reported, scanning intercepted communications. "Heavily guarded, but the building has multiple access points." Sierra studied the tactical display on her tablet, overlaying known building layouts with real-time intelligence about guard positions and defensive measures. The community center was defensible, but not impregnable, if you knew exactly how to approach it. "Commander, I need your team to create a diversion," she said, her plan forming with the clarity that came from years of similar operations. "Something loud and visible that will draw attention away from the community center." "What kind of diversion?" Sierra's smile was sharp as winter steel. "The kind that makes Admiral Holloway think he's won." She began stripping off her tactical gear, trading military equipment for civilian clothes she'd stored in the ranger station's emergency supplies. In minutes, she'd transformed from special operations warrior back into something resembling the waitress Holloway's people expected to find. "You're going to surrender?" Williams asked incredulously. "I'm going to let them think they've captured me," she corrected. "While they're focused on their prize, you're going to eliminate their command structure and extract the civilians." Garrett understood immediately. "You're using yourself as bait." "I'm using their expectations against them," Sierra replied, checking the concealed weapons she'd hidden beneath civilian clothing. "Holloway thinks he knows how Sierra Blake operates because he's been studying her for months, but he's never seen Mirage in action." The plan was audacious to the point of insanity, but it had the elegant simplicity that characterized the best special operations. While Holloway's people celebrated capturing their primary target, Sierra would be working from inside their security perimeter to destroy them systematically. "What about the yacht operation?" Garrett asked. "That happens tomorrow night, regardless of what goes down here today," Sierra said firmly. "But first, we save the people who saved me." She activated a beacon that would signal her location to Holloway's forces, then began moving toward Timbercreek through terrain she knew better than most people knew their own homes.
Behind her, Garrett's team prepared for the most unconventional rescue operation any of them had ever attempted. The first phase went exactly as Sierra had predicted. Holloway's people tracked her beacon to a position overlooking the town, where they found her apparently hiding in a natural rock formation. The capture was professional, but not gentle. Zip ties, hood, transportation to the community center where her civilian friends were being held. "Bring her inside," ordered the tactical commander, a former Delta Force operative named Colonel Marcus Reed. "Admiral wants to interrogate her personally."
Sierra was dragged into the community center, where she could see Betty Nakamura and Frank Delacroix among the detained civilians. Betty's face was tear-streaked but defiant, while Frank looked like he was planning to start throwing punches despite being zip-tied to a folding chair. "Sierra," Betty called out before a guard silenced her with a sharp command. Reed removed Sierra's hood with professional efficiency, studying her face for signs of the legendary operator he'd been briefed to expect. What he saw was a terrified, small-town waitress who'd been caught up in events beyond her understanding. "Not what I expected," he murmured to his subordinate. "Intelligence made her sound like some kind of superhuman killing machine." "Maybe the stories were exaggerated," the subordinate replied. "She looks pretty ordinary to me." Sierra kept her eyes downcast, projecting fear and confusion while actually conducting a systematic threat assessment. 12 guards in the main room, automatic weapons but not body armor, defensive positions that were adequate for containing civilians but vulnerable to anyone with proper training. "Admiral Holloway wants a full debrief before we move to Phase 3, Reed announced to his team. "Make sure she's secure, then prep the civilians for transport." Phase 3. Sierra filed that information away while continuing to appear helpless. Whatever Holloway had planned next, it involved moving the civilians to a different location, probably somewhere less accessible to rescue operations. Through the community center's windows, Sierra could see the first signs of Garrett's diversion. Explosions echoed from the direction of Holloway's temporary command post, followed by automatic weapons fire and confused radio chatter. "What the hell is that?" Reed demanded, keying his radio for a situation report. "Command post under attack. Multiple hostiles, heavy weapons, requesting immediate backup." Reed made exactly the decision Sierra had counted on. "Take half the team and reinforce the command post. I'll maintain security here with the remaining personnel." As 6 guards departed to deal with the apparent assault on their headquarters, Sierra began the final phase of her plan. The zip ties that bound her wrists were cut during the staged capture, held in place by pressure alone. The knife concealed in her boot was exactly where she'd positioned it, and the 12 remaining guards were about to discover why stories about Mirage had become legend in the special operations community. "Actually," Sierra said, raising her head to meet Reed's eyes with a smile that made his blood freeze, "the stories were underestimated." What happened next lasted less than 90 seconds and would be analyzed by military tacticians for years afterward. Sierra moved through the community center like liquid death, eliminating threats with precision that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Guards who'd been professional soldiers found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered, and completely overwhelmed by someone they dismissed as a frightened civilian. When the silence finally settled, 17 civilians were free, 12 hostiles were neutralized, and Sierra Martinez stood in the center of the room with smoking weapons and eyes that held the cold satisfaction of justice served. "Betty," she said gently, cutting the older woman's restraints, "I'm sorry you got dragged into this." Betty looked at her employee, her friend, with new understanding. "You're not really a waitress, are you?" Sierra's smile was soft, but edged with steel. "I'm whatever I need to be to protect the people I care about." Outside, Garrett's team was systematically dismantling what remained of Holloway's operation. But Sierra knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow night, Admiral Nathan Holloway would be selling American secrets to the highest bidder aboard a yacht in international waters.
and Chief Petty Officer Sierra Martinez would be there to stop him.
24 hours later, Sierra stood on the deck of a modified fishing vessel 30 miles off the California coast, watching through night vision scopes as Admiral Holloway's floating fortress appeared on the horizon. The yacht was massive, 300 feet of armored luxury disguised as a billionaire's plaything, bristling with defensive measures that would challenge a military assault team. Target confirmed, reported Captain Diana Cross, the intelligence officer who joined their operation. Satellite imaging shows at least 40 personnel aboard, plus an unknown number of buyers and support staff. Sierra studied the tactical display showing the yacht's defensive configuration. Electronic countermeasures? Full-spectrum jamming, radar deflection, and what appears to be automated defensive systems, Cross replied. This isn't just a yacht, it's a floating weapons platform. Garrett joined them at the rail, his face grim in the pre-dawn darkness. How do we get aboard something like that? Sierra's smile was sharp as a blade. The same way I've always gotten into impossible places, by going where they don't expect anyone to be stupid enough to try. She pointed toward the yacht's waterline, where lights indicated loading bays designed for tender boats and water sports equipment. They're expecting threats from above or from conventional approach vectors. They're not expecting someone to swim up from below. Swim? Williams asked incredulously. In open ocean at night? That's suicide. That's why they won't be watching for it, Sierra replied, already moving toward the diving equipment they'd requisitioned through Colonel Santos's network. Besides, I've done it before. The plan was insane by any rational standard, but Sierra had built her reputation on operations that sane people considered impossible. While Garrett's team created a distraction with their vessel, drawing attention and defensive fire, Sierra would approach the yacht underwater, infiltrate through the loading bay, and work her way up to where the intelligence auction was taking place. What about extraction? Garrett asked as Sierra checked her diving gear. I'll figure that out after I've stopped the sail. Right now, the priority is making sure Holloway's intelligence doesn't end up in hostile hands. She activated her throat microphone, testing the waterproof communication system that would keep her in contact with the team. Remember, once I'm aboard, you maintain distance until I signal. If this goes wrong, don't try to rescue me. Get the intelligence to Colonel Santos and make sure the other Black Tide survivors are protected. Mirage, Garrett said quietly, using her call sign with the respect reserved for legends. Bring Alex home. Sierra nodded grimly. Her brother was aboard that yacht, either as bait to ensure her cooperation or as one of the assets being auctioned to hostile intelligence services. Either way, she wasn't leaving without him. The dive was a nightmare of cold water, crushing depth, and navigation by instruments alone. Sierra swam beneath the waves for over a mile, her rebreather recycling air while she fought ocean currents that tried to push her off course. Above her, the yacht's hull grew larger as she approached, a black leviathan blocking out the stars. The loading bay was exactly where intelligence had indicated, protected by automated sensors that were designed to detect surface vessels, not individual divers approaching from below. Sierra attached herself to the hull using magnetic clamps, then began the delicate process of bypassing electronic locks and pressure seals. Breaking into the yacht felt like cracking a military installation disguised as a luxury resort. Every system was redundant, every entrance monitored, every corridor designed to channel intruders into kill zones. But Sierra had spent years studying facilities like this, and she moved through the lower decks like a ghost made of water and determination. The first indication that she'd found the right place came in the form of voices speaking in languages she'd recognized: Russian, Mandarin, and Arabic. The buyers had arrived for Holloway's auction, and they were discussing purchases that would compromise American national security for generations. Sierra worked her way up through service corridors and maintenance shafts, following sounds and electromagnetic signatures toward the yacht's main conference room. What she found there made her blood boil with controlled fury. Admiral Nathan Holloway stood at the head of a polished conference table, surrounded by men and women whose faces belonged on international wanted lists. Behind him, a massive display screen showed classified files detailing the identities, capabilities, and current locations of dozens of American Special Operations personnel.
As you can see, Holloway was saying to his audience, these assets represent the finest training and experience your organizations could acquire. Each individual has been personally validated through operational performance. On the screen, Sierra saw her own file, photographs from operations that officially never existed, psychological profiles that detailed her methods and weaknesses, and most damning of all, recent surveillance photos from Timber Creek showing her civilian identity. But it was the figure seated at the far end of the table that made Sierra's heart stop. Alex Martinez sat bound and gagged, his face bearing the marks of interrogation, but his eyes still defiant. He was alive, conscious, and being used as both demonstration and leverage. This particular asset, Holloway continued, gesturing toward Alex, survived the black tide operation and has intimate knowledge of American deep cover protocols. His sister, unfortunately, was eliminated during yesterday's extraction attempt, but he retains significant intelligence value. The lie about her death was obviously intentional, either to demoralize Alex or to convince the buyers they were acquiring exclusive intelligence. But Sierra could see the pain in her brother's eyes, the belief that he was truly alone. She keyed her throat microphone to the frequency she'd used for emergency communications during their black tide missions, knowing Alex would recognize the signal pattern even if he couldn't respond. Ghost Team Leader, this is Mirage. Package delivery in progress. Alex's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the voice he'd thought he'd never hear again. Sierra saw the moment he spotted the air vent where she was concealed, saw hope replace despair in his expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holloway announced, "let's begin the bidding." Sierra had heard enough. She armed the flashbang grenades she'd brought for exactly this moment, calculated angles and timing that would maximize confusion while minimizing harm to Alex, and prepared to remind everyone in that room why Mirage had become a legend in the special operations community. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the yacht's ventilation system, "you forgot to mention that the demonstration model comes with a warranty." The explosion of light and sound that followed would be visible from orbit, but Sierra was already moving, flowing through the chaos like a force of nature unleashed. The intelligence auction was about to become a very different kind of demonstration, one that would show these international criminals exactly what American special operations training could accomplish when properly motivated. As smoke and confusion filled the conference room, Sierra dropped from the ceiling like an avenging angel, weapons ready and brotherhood calling her home. The final battle for Black Tide's legacy had begun. The flashbang grenades transformed the yacht's conference room into a maelstrom of disorientation and chaos. Sierra dropped through the smoke like a predator evolved for exactly this environment, her weapons speaking with lethal precision as she moved to secure her brother. The international criminals who'd come to buy American secrets found themselves facing the very weapon they'd hoped to purchase. Sierra moved through their ranks with fluid efficiency, eliminating threats while avoiding harm to Alex, who remained zip-tied to his chair at the far end of the room. "Contact left," she called into her throat microphone, more out of habit than necessity. In situations like this, Sierra worked alone, trusting reflexes honed by years of operations that existed only in classified memories. Admiral Holloway had recovered from the initial shock faster than his buyers, drawing a military-issue sidearm and moving toward a concealed exit. But Sierra had studied the yacht's blueprints during her approach, and she knew there was nowhere for him to run. "Going somewhere, Admiral?" she called, putting 3 rounds into the bulkhead next to his head. "The party's just getting started." Holloway spun toward her voice, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You're supposed to be dead." "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," Sierra replied, advancing through the smoke with weapons trained on center mass. "But yours are about to become very accurate." Around them, the conference room had become a battlefield. International arms dealers and intelligence brokers scrambled for cover behind overturned furniture,
While Sierra moved through their positions like smoke given deadly purpose, some tried to fight back, others attempted to escape through exits that Sierra had already sealed. "Alex," she called to her brother, who was struggling against his restraints, "stay down. This will be over in 30 seconds." It took 28. When the smoke cleared, Admiral Nathan Holloway found himself alone in a room full of bodies, facing the sister of a man he'd tortured and the ghost of an operation he'd betrayed. Sierra stood between him and freedom, her weapon steady and her eyes holding the kind of calm that preceded final judgment. "You have two choices," she said quietly: "surrender and face court-martial for treason, or make this difficult and face me." Holloway's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You think this ends with me? The intelligence sale was just the beginning. There are dozens of assets compromised, dozens of operations exposed. You can't save them all." "Maybe not," Sierra admitted, moving to cut Alex's restraints while keeping her weapon trained on Holloway. Alex rubbed circulation back into his wrists, his voice hoarse from interrogation but strong with relief. "Sis, how did you—" "Later," Sierra said, helping him to his feet. "Right now, we need to secure the intelligence files and get off this floating tomb." But Holloway wasn't finished. "The yacht's rigged with explosives," he said with malicious satisfaction, "enough to vaporize everything within a half-mile radius. Insurance policy against exactly this kind of interference." Sierra felt the familiar weight of impossible choices, the kind that had defined her military career and driven her into hiding. Save themselves and let the intelligence fall into hostile hands, or risk everything to complete the mission. "Where's the detonator?" she demanded. "Biometric lock tied to my vital signs. Kill me, and this entire operation becomes irrelevant." Alex stepped forward, his face showing the kind of cold determination that ran in the Martinez family. "Then we don't kill you, we just make you wish we had." What followed was a demonstration of enhanced interrogation techniques that would have impressed the instructors at SARE school. Holloway's biometric security might have been sophisticated, but it wasn't designed to withstand the psychological pressure that two black-tide survivors could apply when properly motivated. In 15 minutes, they had the disarm codes, the location of backup intelligence files, and a complete list of compromised assets. Holloway sat slumped in his chair, broken by the same techniques he'd used on others, while Sierra transmitted critical intelligence to Colonel Santos's network. "Mirage, this is Blackwater Base. We're tracking multiple naval assets converging on your position. Time to extract." Through the yacht's windows, Sierra could see lights on the horizon, rescue ships responding to the distress signals she'd activated during the assault. But she also saw something else. Smaller boats approaching from multiple directions, moving with the kind of coordination that suggested Holloway's operation had more layers than they'd realized. "We've got company," she reported, studying the tactical situation. "At least 6 fast attack boats, probably armed with anti-ship missiles."
Alex joined her at the window, assessing threats with the same professional competence that had made him legendary in the special operations community. "Backup plan?" Sierra smiled grimly. "When have we ever had a backup plan?" She activated charges she'd placed throughout the yacht during her infiltration, precise explosions that would disable the vessel's engines and weapon systems without sinking it entirely. The intelligence files were too valuable to destroy, and there were still people aboard who might be saved. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced over the yacht's communication system, "this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some technical difficulties, and I'd recommend you abandon ship immediately." The evacuation was controlled chaos, with Sierra and Alex shepherding survivors into lifeboats while maintaining security over the captured intelligence. Holloway remained zip-tied in the conference room, guarded by remote explosive devices that would ensure he couldn't escape or destroy evidence. As dawn broke over the Pacific Ocean, Sierra found herself standing on the deck of a Coast Guard cutter, watching the disabled yacht being secured by federal agents. Around them, the ocean was dotted with rescue vessels and the captured boats of Holloway's support network. "It's over," Alex said quietly, standing beside his sister as they watched justice being served. "This part is," Sierra agreed, "but there is still 43 assets out there who need protection and intel networks that need to be dismantled." Colonel Santos approached them, her face showing the kind of satisfaction that came from operations completed successfully.
Chief Martinez, your actions have prevented a catastrophic compromise of American intelligence capabilities. The president has asked me to convey his personal gratitude. Sierra nodded, but remained focused on practical matters. What about the other black tide survivors? Are they secure? Safe houses are being established as we speak, new identities, if needed, complete protection until we're certain all of Holloway's networks have been neutralized. And Sierra Blake? Sierra asked quietly. Santos smiled. Sierra Blake served her country with distinction and earned her retirement. She can return to Timber Creek whenever she's ready, or she can choose a new life entirely. The choice is hers. As the Coast Guard cutter headed toward shore, Sierra stood at the rail watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. For 8 years, she'd hidden from her past, building a quiet life in a small town where nobody asked difficult questions. Now she had a choice to make: return to the safety of invisibility, or step back into the light as someone who'd served her country with honor and distinction. "What are you thinking?" Alex asked, joining her at the rail. Sierra smiled, feeling the weight of secrets finally lifting from her shoulders. "I'm thinking Betty's probably wondering where I am. The morning rush starts in 3 hours, and the Blue Moon Diner serves the best coffee in Oregon. You're going back?" "I'm going home," Sierra said simply. "To the people who protected me without knowing what they were protecting. To the life I built with my own hands." She looked out at the horizon, where new possibilities waited beyond the sunrise. Besides, Timber Creek's gonna need a new waitress who can handle herself when trouble comes calling. As the Coast Guard cutter carried them toward shore, Chief Petty Officer Sierra Martinez began planning her return to the small town that had given her sanctuary. But this time, she'd be going back as herself. No more hiding, no more lies. Just a woman who served her country and earned the right to choose her own destiny. Some ghosts, she realized, were meant to become legends. Others were meant to come home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.